Hi, everyone, and welcome to our second episode of the Future of Work show. So, today is another really special episode, and we're going to talk about something that is close to a lot of our hearts, which is how will artificial intelligence impact human jobs? Now, one thing might surprise you, but it turns out that millennials and Gen Zs in India are far more concerned about the impact of the fourth industrial revolution, including AI, on their careers than perhaps any other generation anywhere else in the world. So uh, that's really the context of our discussion today. I have with me a dear friend and colleague at Uncube, Jaspreet Bindra, and I'm just going to bring him on. Hi, Jaspreet.
Hi, Shalini. How are you?
Good, good. So wonderful to have you here.
Thank
Uh,
you.
so, for those of you who are new to us, Jaspreet and I just came together maybe 6 months or so ago now to form an organization called Uncube, and we work in the space of future of work. What does that mean for business, organizations, people, leadership, etc., etc.? So that's really the topic that we're going to talk about today. Jaspreet Bindra, many of you might already know of him. He's a well-known author, writer, former CDO of the Mahindra Group, has had a long career in technology, Microsoft, TAS, etc., etc. So he's just the right person to address some of these questions. So happy to have you here, Jaspreet, today with us.
Thank you very much, Shalini. Yes, we met 6 months back, but with COVID and the whole lockdowns, it seems almost like a lifetime now. But I think the topic that we have today, which I'm really looking forward to have a discussion with, is even more relevant, given that so much of our life has been uh, human interactions have suddenly been replaced by machines even before they were supposed to. Like we are talking right now on a video conferencing software. So really look forward to chatting with you.
So let me start by asking you a very basic question, Jaspreet. Uh, what got you interested in this whole space to start off with? You didn't start off as a technologist, but you became a technologist towards the second half of your career. And of course, now you've spent many, many years bang in the center of what digital transformation, fourth industrial revolution, etc., means. So what really interested you and got you excited about this space?
Sure. Thanks, Shalini. No, it's a good question, and it gives me the opportunity actually to reflect and figure out what it really was. But as I think about it, I think two or three things, Shalini. One was just a passion for science fiction, even while I was a child. And I started reading all the famous science fiction authors, starting with Asimov, in fact, Isaac Asimov, even before I think I became a teenager. And it's so interesting, but they say that what you read in science fiction in a particular year actually comes true 30, 40, 50 years later. And it's a lot what Isaac Asimov wrote about actually will probably be relevant in the 60s, 50, 60 years back, which is going to be relevant to what we are talking today. So I think that was the first thing. The second was stumbling onto the internet and the world, it opened up in the late 90s with those modems and those weird sounds coming uh, and, and then jumping from exactly. Though the speeds don't seem to have changed much, by the way. And then jumping to an internet from TAS, which was supposed to be like this, we have arrived in life career, to a unknown internet startup and learning so much. So I think that was the second. And then finally, I realized as I got more experienced, as I worked more, that very frankly, the way the world was going, business and technology were not separate from each other. And I still don't think there is something called a business strategy or a technology strategy. They are the same thing because they just become so intertwined now. And that made me into this so-called technologist in a sense, though I still think I'm a business plus technology kind of person. So those three things, Shalin.
That's so interesting, Jaspreet, because the reason why I got interested in this space was that it increasingly became, very obvious that whatever we had thought of about the organizations which will become successful, or the careers that will thrive, or cultures that will thrive, or leadership that will thrive was all set to change because of technology. And so in my mind, in fact, I think one of the earliest articles I wrote was that, could innovation be the new organizational development? Because in a sense it almost entirely changed the rules of the game. So just the way you've come to it from one angle, I remember feeling just so what shall I say, amazed at how large the shifts were going to be and the immense impact that they were going to have for organizations. And just like you said, the fact that you can't really have technology separate and an organization, leadership, people, strategy separate anymore. They're too closely intertwined. Completely
Absolutely.
understand. Now, can I ask you a few, shall I say, difficult questions or not so easy questions? That's really my thing on this show. I want to call people and ask questions which are on my mind, actually, the ones I'm most curious about, and you're well suited to answer. So let me start off by really asking for your views on where we are today as far as artificial intelligence as a technology is concerned, and what its implications are going to be on jobs very soon. And the reason I ask this is, particularly today, that still a few years ago, the standard dialogue in conference after conference was pretty much the same, that the routine is going to get automated, and anything that requires human creativity or empathy or even conversational skills, etc., was very much the domain of people. But we've seen a lot of that change in the last few months. So I'd love to hear your sense of where are we today.
Great. Well, from I've known you now for a few months, and you've never asked me easy questions anyway. So it's, I guess, a continuation of some of the conversations that we've had in terms of difficult ones. But just to address what you asked me and what you're wondering about, Shalini. Uh, Look, we've always had technology. I mean, technology is something which, maybe starting with when man had stumbled into fire and the wheel, it was technology at that time. And then, since then we've had waves after waves, and, the first, the second, the third, the fourth industrial revolution, in a sense, were all technology driven. But I think one of the reasons why we all talk about AI so much, and why it fascinates us so much, as opposed to every other technology that we've had, is that this one is probably unique. In this one, for the first time, perhaps, we are trying to create replicas of ourselves, and something, trying to literally playing God in many ways, okay, because we are trying to create a being which might not be alive but is intelligent, and then the boundaries between what is intelligence and what is alive also start to blur. And actually, it will fascinate you to know that artificial intelligence in some form or the other actually was starting to be written about from the 11th or 12th centuries. But it kind of, then even last century, people were talking about robots and uh, various such universal robots, as they used to call them. But I think only middle of last century was when it kind of started coming into its own, and there's obviously been a whole lot of work since then in AI. AI, in many ways, Shalini, is actually not a technology; it's a philosophy, and it's a combination of multiple technologies. Ones which we are familiar with, machine learning, for example, or natural language processing, or neural networks, or now deep learning. So all these different technologies kind of come together to create this concept of artificial intelligence. But specifically coming to your question, I think where we are today, after huge leaps actually over the last many years, is in what is called artificial narrow intelligence. So, we have trained machines and computers to do very well in a narrow task better than we can. Uh, when a computer defeated Garry Kasparov in chess in the late 90s was when he created a better chess machine. And now no human being can defeat a machine in chess. None. As in, the machines reign. Uh, and similarly, to uh, search better. Google can search much faster than we ever will. Uh, Play other games better. Uh, like Go, for example, which is a very human game. And so, but what we do not have is what is the holy grail in many ways, which is artificial general intelligence. And that's where, AI would be intelligent, more intelligent, little bit intelligent, us in everything like we are. And so what is happening vis-a-vis jobs, as you asked, is that specific slivers of jobs which are narrow, uh, specific ANIs created, artificial narrow intelligence created, can be better than us in that. And it's replacing jobs, replacing that part. But then many jobs which require a general intelligence, much more wider, not necessarily only deeper, is where, at least for a period of time, humans still reign supreme. So that's what is really happening.
But don't you feel that the line is really blurring? And the reason I ask this is that some things I would have thought are really not as narrow as we would have imagined, like writing. And in your book has a whole chapter written by AI, so it's clearly an example. But besides writing, all of us were pretty much astounded by the Google Assistant's conversational skills and how socially skilled it was, perhaps more socially skilled than I would say maybe most of us. Or the fact that there are AIs which can design, which can create music, rap, Western classical orchestras, or painting, or the fact that now you don't necessarily need physical models for fashion shows. I mean, I think for digital ads you can use virtual models. So there are. It's gone way beyond what we thought was narrow, maybe even 2-3 years ago. I'm sure the technology existed, but it hadn't impacted business as much. Now it's there. It's there in its implications. So that's the question I have for you next. That the famous futurist Ray Kurzweil, who's supposed to be one of the most accurate futurists, and 85% of his predictions are supposed to have historically come true. So one of his predictions is that in 2029, which is really not that far away, it's for most of us, it's in our living careers. Uh, Artificial intelligence will surpass human intelligence. It may. So I want to know, what are your thoughts on that, and what that's going to mean for careers, organizations, and life in general.
Okay. That is what I call a very precise, precise answer. No, it's, there are many. So let me just try and attempt the first part of it, Shalini. And see, look, you're right. The lines are blurry. Okay. And there are many times when you really don't know what's at the other end, whether it's a human being or a non-human being. And in fact, that brings us back to the famous Turing test, Alan Turing of the poisoned apple fame, of the movie fame. And Alan Turing, basically his whole deal was that if you cannot know who's in the other room and you're talking to that person or that thing, and you don't really know whether it's a thing or a person, it has passed the Turing test. Okay, and still, few times we're still not there yet. Okay, for some time we can be talking with a bot, for example, and we don't really know it's a human being or not. But after a little while, you'll come to know, because the answers will become repetitive, and it's very. So we are where the lines are blurring, but we haven't yet crossed the line. And when will we cross the line, or how will we know? Now, in some of the things that you mentioned, about writing and painting, etc., music, hip hop. Now, what has happened is that initially AI was supposed to address only the mechanistic kind of repetitive kind of tasks, okay, which would become which would be taken over by AI much faster, and that's what happened. Very narrow, very repetitive tasks. RPA, famously, robotic process automation, is really one part of that, etc. But then it started going into things which we thought were entirely creative. Okay? Painting, a Rembrandt has been drawn by an AI. The next Rembrandt, it's called, and very few people can figure out whether it's a Rembrandt or not a Rembrandt. Okay, music, as you said, and there are now scores of thousands of music compositions by AI on YouTube, for example. Uh, Playing games like Go, which was a landmark event in AI and deep learning, when the human Go champion, 19-time Go champion, was defeated by AI about 4 years back. And by the way, Lee Sedol, the gentleman, has resigned from Go last year, saying he'll never be able to defeat an AI again. So all of those things. But actually, if you go into all of those, chess, famously with Kasparov, all of these actually have rules. Music has rules, painting has rules, games have rules. And it's what really has happened is that the machines have gotten better and better at playing rule-based things. Or, even painting has rules. You can actually dissect a Rembrandt into exactly a rule-based. What does not have rules is writing, for example. Okay, does not have rules. Driving also has rules, and therefore AI cars, much better than others. And that's why actually AI writing something is super difficult. And what I even attempted in the book, you'll immediately know that this is a very inferior intelligence writing this, okay, as compared to a superior intelligence. And then many other things which, emotion-based things that we will do not have rules. And so we are still, very frankly, at a stage where largely rule-based, learning-based, extrapolation of the past-based, that's what machine learning does, deep learning does, is being managed and well by AI and surpassing us. Now, when will we get to a situation where AGI, or artificial general intelligence, actually becomes, as opposed to artificial narrow intelligence, actually becomes, happens? And that's what Lee Kurzweil, who has been right more than 80% of the time, has famously predicted. There's some confusion between what he has predicted for 2029 and what he has really predicted for 2045. Many would argue that real AGI, and where the human, artificial and real intelligence and natural intelligence will merge, is actually 2045. And maybe in 2029, there is some level of Turing tests being passed, but it's still not there. And it's really 2045 when artificial general intelligence happens. Finally, what happens to jobs, therefore, is interesting. Swaths of jobs are being replaced even as we talk today. There are reports which say that about 60-70 million jobs will go away to AI by 2030. But the same reports also say that 95 million new jobs will be created. And so it's very interesting to see what jobs will go away and what jobs will get created. The mechanistic, mathematical, computing, scraping of websites, robotic process automation kind of jobs certainly will go away. I'll wait for your question to ask me which jobs will remain, because I think a lot of people will be interested in that.
No, that is obviously my next question, particularly, and I think you and I were looking at some of the data on the World Economic Forum just recently, and how the skill profile of what's going to be needed, which is as as now is 2022, has dramatically changed, and all the skills, the top 15 skills, are very layered skills. They are skills like innovation, creative problem solving, which require not just a set of skills, but in a sense, multiple skills to come together. They have elements of creativity, elements of emotional intelligence. So they're, in a sense, far more layered than the skills which were needed, so far. So my next question is, as you guessed, what will this mean for the way organizations and therefore jobs themselves are designed? Uh, my observation has been that except for a handful of jobs in organizations, uh, for the most part, most jobs are fairly routine. You could even draw a decision tree and say, okay, this is your job. And for the most part, or for most roles, maybe 80% of most roles you could work through a decision tree. So, your thoughts on what would all of this mean for that?
That is not an easy question. So you are standing true to your definition there. And people uh, much more, who've done much more work than I have and much more intelligence than me, have actually been attempting to answer this question. But it's really a function of two things. It's both technology. Well, it's three things, Shalini. It's technology, it's economics, and it's also, let's put it this way, our humanness, which kind of all three will need to be considered before an AI can take over our jobs. Okay, so take over jobs that we have. So as I said, look, as we spoke about, from a technology viewpoint, uh, many repetitive jobs are actually going away. If it's a very interesting exercise to see a robot in action, and I don't mean a industrial robot, an RPA kind of robot. It just scrapes sites like in 3 seconds, and fat, and that no human being can ever come close to that. There are already in Europe, etc., dark factories or dark retail, which basically is a factory where there's no human being. Everything, 24/7 robots are working, producing cars and industrial stuff. And because you don't need lights, therefore, because robots don't need lights to see, the factories are actually dark. And therefore, they're called dark factories. And maybe there's just one human being who's kind of roaming around, okay, with a torch or something. Okay, so in those mechanistic things, much of this has happened. I mean, many factories, especially in Germany and Japan, have possibly 4, 5, 6, maximum a dozen human beings in a massive, large factory producing thousands of cars or washing machines every. So that part, I think, is under threat. But then the second question of economics comes in. Still, in many parts of the world, it's still cheaper to have 200 people doing that work rather than having a dark factory and investing huge amounts of capital expenditure and having robots do that work. Okay, and so while we would already be at a stage where technology can replace many jobs, but we still are at that economic stage. Okay, because human beings are still cheaper. Lifts can go up and down without a liftman, but we still have a liftman. And that, sorry, brings me to the third part, where people still prefer human beings to do certain things. Whether even if a machine can do it better. And so while it's eminently feasible for us to have a completely automated supermarket with no human being there, you can just go in and you pick up the stuff and everything gets deducted from your wallets, etc. You still want that human interaction or teaching for that matter. And in fact, that is a bit of a clue into what kind of jobs will survive and what happens to organizations therefore. But I know you've been wanting to ask me a question, so I'll stop here and then move to which jobs survive.
This is actually a follow-up to what you said, because I think for the longest time we've all believed that some form of social contact, because it's so fundamental to being human, what we would, going to a supermarket, for instance, is not just about buying something. It's also about saying hello to something, seeing people around you and maybe smiling at them. So you're right there. But on the other hand, countries like Japan, which have had a challenge of a very large elderly population and very few caregivers, have been investing very heavily for the last couple of years in having robotic caregivers for the elderly. And some of their studies, early studies, seem to suggest that 80% of the people actually preferred them. Now, maybe it is that they preferred them because they never complain. They can ask them 100 times to do something which maybe normal human beings might start getting annoyed about, or what maybe they don't want to feel beholden to another human being in exactly
Or
the
they're
same.
all introverts. Who knows?
Or they're all yeah. So I don't know what's behind that, but it does get me thinking about whether even this boundary is I mean, it can never go away because we are, as human beings, social beings, and we crave social contact. But is it as hard as we imagine? Because a lot of people do seem to prefer the social friendly demeanor of robots powered by artificial intelligence to what's a very wide range of behavior in human beings.
No, that's a very interesting question, Charlie. And there are a lot of technology philosophers, and I use that term for a reason because this is where technology and philosophy, the boundaries blur. Okay, have been talking about that, have been writing about that. How do you give an artificial being like an AI being emotion or judgment or pain? Do you do that? Because look, if we can create, as technology becomes better and better, maybe we can create robots which feel pain. Should we? Should we not? Okay, are we then completely blurring those boundaries? Okay, in AI, one of the biggest topics today is ethics in AI. I mean, the whole thing, actually, the future of human existence is dependent on this ethics on AI. Besides global warming, is dependent on ethics in AI. Okay, because what we are doing today with how we are building those ethics and or not building them will decide the future of the human race. I referred to Isaac Asimov much earlier in my discussion, and Asimov, gave these three laws in 1960s. And if you just bear with me, he said that a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm, was his first law. The second was that it must obey the orders given to it by a human being, except where it conflicts with the first law. And the third one said that the robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or the second law. Okay, and so and most robotics and AI has been actually built on those three laws. But if we were to change them, and there are famous problems, there's the famous trolley problem about if an AI driving a trolley, therefore one child and four human beings, who will it choose? It has to kill one of them. Will it kill itself? So so a lot of that is happening, and there's a lot of those boundaries are blurring. What I would, however, still the most of the technology and the philosophy actually says that there will be some things which will still remain uniquely human. Uh, Compassion or love, for example, or feeling pain, for example. Okay, something which will be almost impossible for humans to replicate in building a machine. There's a very famous Chinese scientist, technologist called Kai-Fu Lee, who was with Microsoft and Google and then Baidu, and he's written a lot about will how do we bring compassion or love or such other emotions in, and will those separate really? And in fact, that gives a clue to which jobs will actually remain and which jobs will actually go away. Uh, but it's today, the things that we are doing today, which is actually going to decide that. And as I'm sometimes fond of saying that, I keep on looking around for artificial intelligence, but all I see is human stupidity. And so it's this human stupidity which will decide a few of these things. But I'll stop here because I can wander on and on about this particular question. And I
So
know you want to ask me which
I have
jobs will be.
actually not so easy question, and this is now, frankly, some of what you've said has triggered these questions. So, um, see, one of the things that because we're trying to define what's going to be uniquely human and therefore more likely to stay as a human job versus a technology job. Uh, and combine this with the fact that, according to almost all research, what has been predicted as the most sought after skills are far more complex and layered than any time in the past. How do you imagine young people will get these complex and layered skills if the building blocks to those, which were the simpler, more routine skills, will become, harder to develop because those jobs themselves will be automated now. That's I know this is a completely random one, but I don't think if you have any thoughts on that.
So, to kind of dissect that, let's figure out what jobs do we think will survive and which will not, based on all these various things, right? And I'll come to the young people thing, who, by the way, I have a lot more confidence in than many young people themselves do. Uh, but uh, but if you kind of go back to what I was saying, if in your mind you picture a x-axis and a y-axis. I'm sorry, you have to bring some of this engineering things in. This is, after all, a technology discussion also. Okay, and if you think of an x-axis and a y-axis, and if you think of the x-axis as being very optimized to least optimized, and therefore, machine-like to creative. Okay, at one thing. And very obviously, a lot of the AI-ish jobs will cluster towards the machine thing and gradually creep towards the creative stuff, as we talked about, painting, music, etc. But then, if you put a second axis on that, okay, and that axis is about love, actually, compassion. And this is, I'm quoting Kai-Fu Lee here, and it's about compassion. And then you have high compassion and low compassion. And then, therefore, you have this famous matrix, which every one of us is very fond of making. And you'll find that the low are entirely entirely machines. Low compassion, low creativity. Everything is going to go to the machines. Okay, and probably rightly so. Because those were mindless jobs anyway. Okay. But then the things start to become interesting in the other axes. And so, high creativity, low compassion will be, AI will keep on getting more creative, but human beings will always be there to guide and to teach. And then the high compassion, low creativity, largely humans helped by AI in a few things. So you will still want your children to take care of you in your old age, or at least meet you in your old age. But AI is to help you with your household chores, etc., which the children are going to probably do. Okay, and but then the fourth quadrant, which is high compassion and high creativity, is going to be continue to be dominated by human beings for the foreseeable future, until global warming kills us all anyway. Okay, so and those are the jobs which and those, they're like literally 10 jobs which Kai-Fu Lee has defined. Psychiatry or therapy or medical care or writing or law, but then interestingly also management, general management, and science, and funnily, what, computer engineering. Okay, and robot making. Someone has to make them better and better. Okay, and put in more stuff. So a lot of these other 10 jobs which is defined are actually going to remain. Uh, and I think, coming back to the last, coming to the one of the things that you asked within this, that if the building blocks go away, what happens? What do they kind of build on? I don't think the building blocks go away, Shalini. New building blocks come. I mean, one big building block would be actually coding these things, and they will be therefore deciding what actually gets built. Okay, a lot of, as I said, a lot of jobs which are not only repetitive will still remain, but with a combination of AI, and so those building blocks will remain, and whatever other things human beings do not do well, the things that they do very, very well is to adjust. And that's why we are the predominant species still, until our children, which many writers speculate will actually be AI, okay, come in and become better than us. Until then, we will adjust the fastest and continue building on the things we have, and new things which we will build on. So I don't really have, I'm not worried about, I'm not worried about the children. I'm much more worried about their parents, who are mostly us, who are probably building AI wrong. And so 20, 30 years later, they will see, unfortunately, the bad effects of wrongly built AI. That's what I worry about.
Oh, thank you. That was really, really interesting. I love the axis. That was really interesting.
Yeah, it's kind
There are a few.
there are,
Yeah.
yeah, I can see a few too.
So Deepak asks, what skill sets should today's kids build or life skills for the post-COVID job market? So much about this.
Well, Deepak, I will disappoint you to say that there will be no post-COVID. Okay, it will always be with COVID. COVID is here to stay. It's just that we will have to figure out how to live with it. Okay, and in fact, because even if when we have a vaccine, COVID will still be there. It's just that we'll become more and more resistant to it. Those who are so there's no post-COVID. Having said that, actually that gives a clue to what kind of skills, etc. So I think two things, and it's slightly moving away from the AI topic here, but two things. I think one of the things that COVID has done is build new habits. They say that within 22 to 66 days, depending on culture, person, uh, a person makes new habits, and we have already gone past the 66-day mark. And so new habits, so customers and us have developed new habits, and so our journeys will change in almost everything. The way we eat out, uh, um, the way we work, the way we meet people, the way we travel, everything is going to change. Our journeys are going to change. Customer journeys are going to change, and we will have to rapidly adjust and build technology to make those journeys, to kind of adjust our companies and ourselves and our jobs to meet the new customer journey. So I think that's going to be one big thing. And the second thing, which is more specific to your question, is that COVID will also teach us the concept, the value of lifelong learning. Because many things which we took for granted in terms of our jobs or requirement of our skills actually go away because of this massive disruption. Okay, and not needed anymore. And so it's not good enough to just do your engineering and or your MBA or whatever and say that, look, my education done for life. These disruptions will happen. You'll have to learn something new, pivot very fast, and therefore lifelong learning, where you do a 60-year MBA, as Harvard famously is thinking of, for example, where every year or every 18 months you learn a new skill. I think COVID is going to accelerate lifelong learning.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer because uh, you're right. It's been such a leveler. So
Yeah.
many skills that we had acquired uh, before through our careers, many of them are irrelevant. All of a sudden, and therefore the ability to understand the larger winds of change and what that means for us, and then have a proactive response and develop a new set of skills is in turn the set of skills that all of
Absolutely.
us, irrespective of age, almost need. What's happening in the larger context? What does that mean for us? What should I do differently? And the whole liquid mindset that we sometimes speak about. So there's another interesting question from Swapnalekha. She's asking, does it also mean that value building is something we should concentrate on the most in budding managers or architects who are designing the technology for the future?
So, Malika, I wish that all of us would think the same way and be asking this question to ourselves. I don't think the 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 value of value building was ever diminished. I mean, even earlier on also, focusing on building values was the right thing to do. Today also it's the right thing to do. It's just that today, specific to the topic we are talking about, we are actually building very potent technology for the future. Uh, uh, we are also in many ways doing our best to destroy the planet for the future. And in both of these things, and they're, in my mind, equally massive disruptions which are going to come, which are going to put COVID to shame. Uh, for both of these, what we do today is actually going to decide what happens 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line, and whether Ray Kurzweil's singularity prediction happens for the good or not. And therefore, absolutely, I think the 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 importance of values today with children, with employees, with uh, large technology companies, which are sometimes not abiding with it, with coders, with everyone who's involved in somehow creating this world of tomorrow, is super critical, and it's not getting as much attention as it should.
Thanks. So one last question. I know there are still several. Maybe we'll answer them over text. And this question is from Naishad in Australia. And Naishad is actually a very, very experienced LinkedIn Live itself. I watched several of your shows. So nice to see you here. He's asking you how government or policymakers might be responding to all of this. So wondering if you have any insight on that.
I was hoping you would not pick that question. Not because I cannot answer it, but because I'm not very happy with the answer. it's um, I think Nasha, geopolitically, this revolution has come at the wrong time. This AI revolution. Think about what else is happening. There's this whole scare and this whole hurtling towards a. I keep on saying it, but globally warmed Earth. There are strong men, and they're all strong men. Okay, there are strong men coming in and ruling the most important countries, the largest countries in the world. Nationalism is becoming more and more rampant. Globalization, global cooperation is going away. It's not fashionable anymore. Uh, and we are creating the most important and or disruptive and or destructive technology that we would ever do at the same time. And so therefore a lot of work which is happening in AI is actually towards how to create better drones, for example, okay, which would or better war weapons. Okay, and there's a very frightening array of AI-based weapons which are being created.
Really?
Absolutely. So we should not even think about that, otherwise it will be extremely depressing. And at a time when actually the world should be coming together, like it did in many AI conferences earlier, and built new rules and solved some of these ethical issues around AI, is when we are actually going apart and creating our own national AI policies. And each country is, frankly, rather than a global AI framework, the way we did for nuclear weapons, for example. And that actually worked, so far at least. And each country is doing it, and each country has its own agenda. Putin has famously said that whoever controls AI is going to control the earth, and so he's trying his level best to do that. China is investing more than perhaps every other country put together as a government in AI and creating its own AI-based social scoring system, which makes 1984 look like a children's fairy tale. In the US, large companies have taken that agenda and they are are working on AI with purely a profit motive. And so, it's not a good story in terms of what is happening around AI with each country. I think we need a global agenda for AI, which works for the world rather than works for specific countries. But we live in a nationalism, and that makes me depressed. That is why I was hoping you would not pick the question, Shalini.
Oh, thank you. That was such an important question. This was a question I wanted to ask, and Aisha asked it for me. So there we had it. I think we've run out of time. It was such a wonderful discussion. I think one of the most interesting things is that even though we both work together, some of these
Yes.
things we haven't ever discussed before. So that makes it even
Yeah.
more interesting.
No, that to Shalini, and very frankly, I think, and what we are trying to do together actually plays a lot in this. I mean, it's all about the future of work, and the future of work is actually about human beings and technology actually working together seamlessly. Because that's what work is going to be, and a lot of what we spoke about today is actually going to define the future of work, if it may. And so it was interesting to me from that perspective too.
So just before we end, Jaspreet, since you're on me today, do you want to say a little bit about what Uncube does?
Well, I started saying that, so great, sure, absolutely. I'm always happy to plug our stuff. Okay, so about 6 months back, pre-COVID, Shalini and I came together to create a company called Uncube, which actually stands for the fact that you move away from cubicles, both in your mind and physically. And the Uncube really is is being built towards creating future-ready companies, both from a technology and business viewpoint, which I try and bring in, and the HR and people and organization element, which Shalini, with all her experience, definitely does bring in. As I was doing what I was doing before this, I felt this need for the fact that just technology or business cannot define the future and the future of work. The most important part is the people element, and I'm sure you also felt the same way in reverse. And so what we're trying to do actually is to create a thought leadership platform for future of work, which will help companies make themselves future ready with all these impending human as well as technology disruptions which are going to happen.
Thank you. Thank you for doing my job for me today. So, with that, we come to the end of this discussion. I will respond to all comments right after. And of course, there'll be a recording on my LinkedIn profile. There'll also be a recording available on YouTube, which I will share right after. Next Saturday at noon, I have Professor Vijay Ghai with me. We're going to be talking about the psychology of design thinking. So, design thinking, we all know as a tool and technique, but of course, some of people listening to us and maybe some others also understand that there are very deep psychological, mind shifts almost underpinning design thinking. So, what does that mean, and what might that mean for the way we live and lead organizations? So, those are going to be some of the topics of discussion next Saturday at noon. Thank you very much for joining us, and bye.
Thank you very much.